Welcome to the Religious Studies Project, hosted by David Robertson and myself, Christopher Cotter. This podcast is produced in association with the British Association for the Study of Religions, and you can visit our website at www.religiousstudiesproject.com.
The format of this week's interview is slightly different from our normal. The reason for this is Knut Melvere had lined up an interview with Jim Lewis at the EASR conference this year, but before he could record that interview, Jim came down with a serious cold, which left him with a rather painful throat and a bit of a croaky voice. He had a chat with Knut anyway, which Knut recorded, but we didn't expect we'd be able to use it. However, upon listening back, actually his voice, maybe he doesn't sound much like himself, but it's perfectly legible, and actually what he has to say we thought was extremely interesting, and so we didn't want to waste the opportunity to let you hear the recording. So with that caveat, here's James Lewis talking to Knut.
Yesterday you told me you wanted to discuss sort of the state of the study on new religion. Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you could tell us more of what you're thinking there.
There's a specific area that I've thought about in a systematic way. And then there's a broader field. And the area I've thought about more systematically is the generalizations in our field about the typical person who joins an alternative religion. And we have a problem because our generalizations are based on studies that were carried out in the 70s and 80s, mostly. And for the most part, we haven't done new demographic studies of members of such groups. And I think that's partly because at the beginning it was mostly social scientists, particularly sociologists, who study new religious movements. And of course, their methodological bag of tricks, includes all these quantitative methods. So we were getting a lot of quantitative studies. But tracing new religious movements across time, people in religious studies got very interested. You can see it in Norway. The people who study new religious movements in Norway are, with few exceptions, a religious studies background.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's not that there's an antagonism to quantitative methods. It's just that, my background's religious studies as well. It's just that, we're not systematically trained in them, so we don't feel confident in using them, so we want to do other kinds of studies. And what happened was, I was studying this group in Milwaukee, where I used to teach. I kind of stumbled onto them, and they were, have you ever heard of a group called the Holy Order of Mans?
No, I don't think so. Holy
Order of Mans. It was popular back in the late 60s and 70s. And it was kind of a Catholicism, or the outward visual. They would do communions and they dress up with collars, clerical collars. But their core beliefs were more kind of New Age or esoteric. And not the founder, he died early, but somebody else took the order over later and pushed it in the direction of orthodoxy. And they, as a unique religious community, they disappeared. But the Order of Christ Sophia is a more recent group that is kind of a latter-day reincarnation of the Holy Order of Mans. Well, they were founded formally in 1999. I started studying them in 2005, so just a half a dozen years after they were founded. And after a certain point, I'd go over to their center in downtown Milwaukee, and I noticed that the membership was not young, but it wasn't mostly old baby boomers either. It's kind of in this middle. So I did a questionnaire with their membership, all over the country at the time. I think there were only about 100 of them. And their average age was in the 30s. When you subtracted the average age at which, the length of time they've been involved, they joined in their mid-30s. That was the average age. And I thought, So anyway, I wrote a book about them. Other people participated in it. We did another questionnaire in 2008 and found essentially the same thing. Though they were a little older by then. And in the book I said, this is not what our generalization usually is, new religious movements. The new religious movements that have been around for a while, Hare Krishnas, Munis, those folks maybe, we know that they're older now. But we still have this generalization that people join when they're young. And I said, that's not happening with this group. So I said, be aware of that next time you do anything like this. So then I didn't think much of it. After that, I was studying Satanism, and mostly internet Satanism, and they're mostly young.
Yeah.
So they kind of fit the generalization, so I didn't think that much about that. But then Helen Berger, who's an American sociologist who studies paganism, she had in mind doing this broad internet survey. She had been the primary author of a book, Voices from the Pagan Census, published in the 90s. And she had an old-timey questionnaire that you fill out and send in. A long, involved process, that is. And she wanted to update the information. So do you familiar with SurveyMonkey?
Yeah.
So we put a big questionnaire, like 80 some odd items, on SurveyMonkey. And she announced it through her contacts. And from 2009, 2010, we had over 8,000 people fill it out.
Oh, that's really good.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. I don't know what prompted this to come together, but I thought, we've got such a big data set. I wonder about my earlier idea about average age of new converts. And so there was something about the way we worded the items that it was much easier for me to work just with one set of data. So I worked with 2009 data. Still, it was over 6,000 respondents. And their average age of joining was late 20s. However, I have this other idea. Why don't I split it up into 5-year periods during which people, I think the way we worded the item was, when did you become, it was either practicing pagan or self-identified pagan. So we could kind of, because there are lots of people that are kind of fringy. And so I separated it out in 5-year periods. And, the correlation was perfect. People started joining when they were 18 back in the 70s. In the most recent time period, they were 31. And in between, there was this perfect spectrum, I mean, I didn't even have to run the numbers. I knew it was strong correlation. I thought, wow. I felt like because I knew no one had written anything along those lines. And now, of course, I was using what I later called a quasi-longitudinal technique.
Okay.
Because I'm not taking samples every 5 years. I'm sort of retroactively creating these artificial periods of time. But still, I think anyone could look at the data and say, yeah, there's something there.
So if I understand you correctly, the demographics has just kind of changed throughout the last years on how...
Well, I wasn't able to look at how the demographics had changed. What I was looking at was how the age of people when they started changed. And I'm thinking of designing a questionnaire. If I get this Norwegian grant, I'm going to do it. Where I'm asking people when they got involved, how many children they had, what their education was, what the job was, blah, 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 as opposed to now. And see, well, of course, they'll have more children and all that. But see if there's anything remarkable, any remarkable difference. But in the pagan study, the average age increases every 5-year period from 18 in the 1970s up until 31 in the 2009, or the period from 2005 to 2009, something. Anyway, so at the same time, I was studying a group, an American guru group, Adi Dam. That group's gone through different name changes anyway, and I don't need to describe them. But I was involved in a research with a project on them with some other people. And their core membership's like less than 1,000. And we had enough, and we had 200 people fill it out eventually, which is 20%. It's a reasonable sample. It's not a random sample. So I said, I wonder if I could do the same thing with that a lot smaller sample. But I worked it out, except for one outlier, one breaking the pattern. It was again this perfect increase in age from mid-20s up to 50. I mean, the same kind of spectrum, but instead of 18 to 31, it says mid-20s up to 50 with that one outlier. And I said, it's interesting. So different age spectrums, but the same pattern. But when I had done that second group, I really knew there's something really here. So I'm on this email list, and I mailed out and asked people if they had anyone had come across this, or if they had any data that would bear on them. And Peter Anderson down the University of Copenhagen. Down the University of Copenhagen, they've been collecting data on Scientologists for a long time. So he had a graduate student do the numbers, and it was this basic pattern, except he had data from Scientologists in the 60s, and there was it's like the data in 5-year periods from the 60s down into the early 70s, the age declined. And then from the early 70s up to when they had their last data, which was the 1990s, then you saw the same climb. Burke Rochford he's a scholar of the Hare Krishna movement. He had done a major questionnaire they sent all over the world in the 1990s. And he looked at his data, he calculated it, except for one outlier. He said, oh, yeah, the same patterns in the Hare Krishna data. And so then I said, nobody can just criticize my methods and say, yeah, Jim, you were just, this online questionnaire method is wrong and all that stuff. So when I get 2 other respected researchers who find the same thing in their data that they collected in a non-online environment, I said, this is robust. And then I added more data. There's a group, Movement for Spiritual Inner Awareness. Hard to describe them, kind of a spin-off of Ekankar, though they wouldn't like me saying that. But they have certain commonalities there. I wrote a book about them back in 97. So I contacted them and, hey, I'd like to do another questionnaire on you guys. Because I'd done one back back in the 90s. I said, sure. So I got a good response from them, like 500 respondents, which represents about 20% again. Perfect correlation, no outliers. Although in the very first period, in the late 60s, people were a little older. And it corresponds with where the little older people at the start of the Scientology data, where it was too. So I could say, well, here's the people who've been involved in the counterculture are starting to impact. And so the age is going down. And then from the mid-70s forward, and the counterculture is already kind of gone, and we're still having the fallout from the counterculture. Now people are getting older. And I also, just because I knew people would ask this question, I've been doing all these groups based on the early 1970s as kind of a starting point. So I thought people might say that, yeah, but what about more recent groups? Maybe they start young, and it's only these older groups are attracting older people. Kind of a cohort effect. So there's a American spiritual teacher named Andrew Cohen. He teaches a kind of neo-Vedanta system and meditation. They publish a magazine that used to be called What is Enlightenment? You may have seen that. Well, even some of our listeners may have seen that. Anyway, they changed their names numerous times. They were founded in the late 80s. And so I got them to agree to do this questionnaire too, and modified for their specifics. There's a lengthy, long online questionnaire. They're not quite as large a group. I only had 138 respondents. And even though you can see this correlation in the data, it's not large enough to have a significant, statistical significance. But you can see it, and you can also see that people don't start joining when they're 18 or 19. In that group, they were like in their early 30s. So I say, well, older people are joining these groups now. And, I know that's really strong. And, but as I was working with it, I thought, well, what about our other generalizations? For example, at some point, people stumbled on this idea of being converted via personal networks. And that became all the rage, and everyone started using that. And it's a much bigger improvement over the psychological, okay, what's wrong with these people, why they join cults. And I had collected on those questionnaires, I had people talk about their involvement, and I had them specifically say, what was the very first thing that got you interested in this group? Was it a friend? Was it something you saw on TV? Blah, blah, blah. And then they could later talk about other factors that were involved. So it's your first point of contact, and for some groups, it's still interpersonal. But for other groups, neo-paganism, it's the internet, predominantly. It's either something they read or the internet, and that is it's not personal networks anymore. In this group I started studying in Milwaukee, Order of Christ Sophia, they promote themselves online and also with posters and so forth. And the majority of current converts don't come in because of someone they knew. They come in because of something they read or something they saw. So I wrote another article, that'll come out sometime this year, which I say that the network conversion idea is still relevant, but it's not the only or not the predominant way in which people become involved in alternate religions anymore. So, I really have been thinking, we're still operating with generalizations that were formed a quarter of a century ago. So, I've written a number of things saying, we got to rethink this, people. And so that's the area where I've thought the most about what's wrong with the field of new religious movements. Now, more generally, my thoughts are more speculative. Well, before I leave the quantitative, I had an MA student who wrote her thesis on the Art of Living Foundation. It's a spin-off from TM. It's in Norway.
Okay.
Well, the reason we chose it is because it's in Norway.
Okay.
And so she went down to Oslo and took their basic course, and then also did a little demographic questionnaire, not elaborate like the ones I was doing. And she found some interesting stuff. And I said, let's try to see if we can find other groups in Norway or Scandinavia that have had demographic research done on them. Hers is the only one for Norway. I asked Liselott Frisk, and she said, well, we ask the groups about the characteristic of the members. We don't do surveys. And I think in Denmark, the University of Copenhagen stuff on the Scientologists, I think that's, I may be incorrect on that, but I think that's the only thing down there. And also what I found, there was a survey of things that have been published on new religions in Norway in Dean, that Elizabeth and
Bjørn Ola.
No, not Bjørn Ola.
Sorry.
Ingvild.
Ingvild, of course.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised when I looked at that article because almost everyone's doing stuff on the New Age.
Yeah, this was the kind of summary article.
Yes. What's been published.
Yeah.
And the people who've done studies of more formal new religions as opposed to New Age, this is a larger category, new religiosity, which I kind of like. But anyway, they were studying them overseas. There was someone who had done her thesis or dissertation on Japanese religious group in Costa Rica or some other Central American country. And Bjørn Ola had studied the Baha'i in Central America. And the people who had studied more formal new religions in Norway is almost non-existent, or they'd studied, there were a couple of theses or dissertations done on the literature a group was producing. No contact with the people at all. And so I said, well, maybe they just don't exist here. But they do.
Yeah,
there's plenty of them, actually, particularly down in Oslo area.
Yeah, in Bergen as well. We just had a UFO conference there.
Oh!
Or they had.
I wish I'd known that. Anyway, there's more than just the New Age here. There's, lots of groups, particularly like Neo-Hindu groups, Buddhist groups. They have out, Zen groups, particularly Tibetan Buddhist groups that aim primarily at Westerners. We got lots of groups here.
Yeah, and also forms of Christianity, I guess.
Yeah. There's a couple of groups that came out of the Jesus movement, Calvary Chapel and Vineyard Christian Fellowship, and they both have outreaches here in Norway. I'm sure they're also here in Sweden as well. But it's amazing on the one hand how much has been done on this vaguer religiosity, and considering how many people are working in this field, how little has been done on concrete religious groups.
It is maybe the study of new religiosity, but not the study of new religions.
Yes.
perhaps.
Yes.
Maybe that's acceptable.
Yes.
Difference.
So that's why I wrote a grant proposal to study these groups.
Yeah.
So we'll see if the Norwegian Research Council gives me money.
So I was kind of curious, and I guess this is the billion-dollar question. Why has there been this sort of change that you saw in the data? Have you any, if you should speculate, or if you have any theory?
Well, it's hard to put forward a theory because even though you can see the same pattern in different groups, it's so different because current pagans are 31 who join. Members of Adi Dam are 50 years old.
And so it may be different reasons behind those.
Well, it's clear that a factor in, the new religions became big things back in the late 60s, early 70s, as the counterculture was going down. And for a long time, people have said that it's ex-members of the counterculture and got involved in alternative religions. And at the initial stage, I think that's true. But that's why when I saw the age pattern in the Order of Christ Sophia, I was so intrigued. Because if they were all older baby boomers, then I'd understand, okay, this is the generation of the hippies, who's continued to get involved in different religious groups. They just switched them. But it wasn't that age group at all. And it wasn't young people, it was more intermediate. I mean, I've had people tell me, it's just the same age cohort from the post-60s. And I said, no, that's my whole point. It's not. It's post-baby boomers, or pre-baby boomers, people who are born after the baby boom period. And I mean, all I know is the baby boom, the counterculture died, and then that's why people who got involved back then were young. And, we're getting older as we move in time away from the counterculture. But beyond that, I don't know. I don't know. If you look at the pattern, like in 5-year periods, they get older each 5-year period, but it's not 5 years older.
No, exactly.
It's, maybe it'll be 28 one 5-year period, and then 30 the next 5-year period, and then 31 the next 5-year period. They're getting older, but it's not the same age cohort. So, Brooke Rochford, when he sent me his stuff, he wrote me this whole long half-page thing on why he thought the age pattern was changing the Hare Krishna movement. And then this article, in which I put all this stuff together, it's appearing in Newman next year sometime. I reproduce his whole explanation for the Hare Krishna movement. And I say, I can't extend. He was giving me some very specific things about what happened to that specific movement. And, but it couldn't be extended to other groups. It's just, and it would seem to me that it'd be the same cohort that would be getting older, but it's not. It's some other kind of pattern.
Is it sort of general drifts?
Yeah.
When you're already doing quantitative research, it would be interesting to put some other variables in the mix and see if there's something to do with when people are having families, or there's something with the founders maybe, or the.
Well, I intend to. I'll get some money from somewhere. Do something that will get more specific. But my polemic, saying I have a polemic, my critique is that as a field, we're not collecting data. We just kind of, read some stuff and talk to some people, and that's all good and well. And I'm not critical of that. But we need people to be doing this quantitative research as well, rather than continuing to operate without moted generalizations.
Yeah, or at least there should do some kind of both, I guess.
Oh yeah. I mean,
yeah.
Or there should be some people, maybe just a few people who are doing this stuff, so we don't say incorrect things.
Yeah, exactly. And stay relevant.
Stay relevant.
Yeah, completely agree. And in Norway, we have a situation that people, or the people who does the quantitative research on religion, they are set in the Center for Church Research.
Yes.
And they are perfectly good and very smart people, but they have certain, I guess, obligations or a certain focus on what they want to learn, which is not necessarily the same as we as in the study of religion want to learn.
Yes.
So we have sort of a gap there.
Someone, I forget his name, he wrote something recently on the New Age in Norway, worked at a church center. But he was looking at these big national surveys, and looking at that data.
Very crude.
Yes. And doesn't ask that much. It asks about reincarnation, for example.
Yeah, and if you have a talisman, and whether you would call yourself spiritual, that's basic.
Yeah. Oh, are you spiritual? No.
And the interesting thing is that they conclude from these surveys that we don't really have a resurgence or I don't know, new religiosity isn't really that popular in Norway because there aren't that many people who are spiritual but not religious and stuff like that. You can see that from the evidence, right? So we have kind of a tension between those who are more in the traditional religious studies, who sees new religiosity many places, and those who deals with the data. It's not a very strong tension, but there's some.
Well, and then there's apparently some American atheist who I mentioned this earlier. He pointed to data in Norway. He said most people in Norway are atheists. It shows we don't need religion. And he's just looking at this kind of gross data.
Yeah. He could develop his argument if he went into sort of the political section or something, because we have compartmentalization or privatization in Norway as far as whether religious institutions have any impact on the official things, I guess. But it is still not that clear-cut, because the state church, or the church formerly known as the state church, still have a lot of power and a lot of significance. People uses it. They go marry and they go baptize and stuff like that.
Right.
Even though they don't call themselves religious. And we still have up to 80% who are members. So, yeah, it isn't that clear-cut, I think.
Yeah.
It's messy.
But to go to the larger field of new religious movements, I'm not surprised. I note that in the Nordic countries, that's really a legitimate area of study. If you say, I specialize in new religions, it's fine. In the United States, it's still marginal, even though the field kind of started there. But if you apply for a job in the United States and you say, I'm a new religious movements specialist, and they'll say, no, we don't you have to be American religion, or you have to be Hinduism, or there are these strong categories. And what's that I see happening in America is that there's a set of people who were working on new religions back in the 70s, and they're still working on them. But there are very few younger people coming along. I mean, Jim Richardson and David Bromley and Gordon Melton and myself, we're all old. And, except for pagan studies, I mean, they're like they have their whole other universe. And, Gordon Melton was even saying he thinks that new religious movements will die out, the study of them, because there's no younger people coming along to study them. But that's not the case over here.
No, not at all.
Here it's lively, vibrant. This field is recognized as a legitimate field of study.
Yeah, and we are having the first international conference on esotericism next week.
Yes.
So there seems to be kind of a establishment of the field.
But the new religious movements, Lieselot Frisk and I notice there's no membership organization. In esoteric studies, you can become a member of whatever. But in the study of new religious movements, there's no professional organization. We started one, it's incorporated in Sweden, and we've promoted it on lists, but what I told Lieselot is we have to make some advantage to belonging. We have to have a conference and say, it's €100 to come to this conference, but if you're a member of our organization, it's only 50. Then people will join. She was, but it's kind of, it's interesting the way it's so different over here as opposed to the US. And it's interesting that this area of specialization has been around since at least the 1970s, and we're only now starting a membership organization.
But maybe that has something to do with secularization.
No, I think that has to do with...
because in a more secular environment, it's perhaps easier to deal with these sort of things than in an environment where we have a strong religious tradition, such as it is perhaps in America, I think.
Well, I think part of the difference is that back in the United States, there's lots of conventionally religious people.
Yeah.
So if you want to study religion, that's the big structure on the landscape. Strong Catholic Church, Protestant Church, all these Christian sites. Over here, not so much. Everyone sort of talks about the state churches of all the Nordic countries. Well, everyone says, that's dying, just a bunch of old people go to the church. So what's left is immigrant religions like Islam and religious movements. So I think you're correct. I think that conventional, traditional religion over here is not a social force. So that's why the other things appear larger on the landscape.
And also conventional religion influence in the academy, I guess. How close you are to theology or divinity studies or whatever. I would imagine that has something to...
Well, I don't know. I mean, half of my department's theologians over here.
Yeah, this is in Scandinavia. but yeah. So thank you, Professor Lewis, for your time, and it's been a very interesting session, and a little different session from the usual format. That is more an interview, a formal interview.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
do another one when my voice comes back.
Yeah, let's do that.
That was Knut Melver speaking to Jim Lewis at the EASR conference earlier this year, and I'm sure that you'll agree that that was worth the slightly different format. Well, we're coming towards the end of the academic year and also the end of the first year of the Religious Studies project. Next week we have a special roundtable on the subject of non-religion and its importance or otherwise to the academic study of religion, with Chris, Dr. Stephen Sutcliffe, Ethan Quillen and several others. In lieu of a response on the Wednesday, we are hosting several recordings from the NRSN, that's the Non-Religion and Secularity Networks conference, again from earlier this year, featuring Grace Davey, Callum Brown and others, and we'll be putting those out together on Wednesday. After that, there's only one more podcast before Christmas, which we haven't recorded yet, but we think it's going to be something quite special to mark the end of our first year, so maybe I'll let you know a little bit more about that next week. As always, I'll remind you that we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter. You can leave comments on our website, www.religiousstudiesproject.com. We do like to hear from you. We like to hear some debate. We're available on iTunes, and if you listen to the podcasts on iTunes, I will ask you to please rate us. But for now, I'll leave you by saying thanks for listening.